I might have to walk away from that one for a little bit, for a few minutes, gain my composure before I come back to the table. Because I'm like, what the fuck, you know?
Villain limps in
Mm-hmm.
and it folds around to me, and I open up for $30.
Okay.
It folds to the button, and then the button calls the $30,
Mm-hmm.
and the under the gun also calls.
So both of those guys have 630-ish? Is that the button and the...
Well, the button actually has approximately 850.
Okay, but he's not going to be relevant to the hand, is that...
No,
Okay.
no, the button will be relevant.
Oh, the button
The
will be...
button will
Okay.
be
All
relevant.
right, so I'm just going to put
Yep.
850 here. Okay.
Okay. And so the pot at that point is approximately $97.
Okay.
Well, when the flop comes out, it comes out ace of clubs, king of diamonds, nine of diamonds.
Let me just point one quick thing out here, too. You made it 30 over the top of one limp. What do you straight raise to in this game, just out of curiosity? Is it 20? Is it 25?
Typically $25.
Uh-huh. 25. Okay. All right. So you're just sort of adding one on top. And
That's right. I just added one for the limp call.
okay. All right. So you flop top set. Ace of clubs, king of diamonds, nine of diamonds. You have ace of spades, ace of hearts, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And I felt glorious about this flop, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, in thinking about it, I really plan to check raise if possible. So under the gun checked, I
Well,
checked.
hold on a second. Hold on a second.
Yeah,
I always hate to check. I always hate it as a plan to check raise if I'm in the middle. I mean, you're just,
right.
oh, God. And by the way, you're blocking all the top pair here too. So here's the problem with planning to check raise from the middle, right? It would be one thing if you were up front, but if the limper is naturally checking to you and you check, a guy in position with a king is going to check back a lot because he doesn't know the strength of the limper's hand because the limper is naturally checking to you. You're blocking all the top pair. So I just find it very, very optimistic in the middle to plan for a check raise here for those reasons, if you get what I mean.
100%
Yep.
understood.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, under the gun did check, and
Yep.
I checked as well.
Yep.
The button ended up doing something that I thought was odd, and that was $100.
So the button bets pot.
She bet pot,
That is
and
very
then
that you know why that's also very odd is, I mean, not only do you block a lot of the aces, right? Because usually a bet like that is going to represent a good ace, maybe even like aces up. Now she might have king nine for like bottom two. The other thing too, in one of the really good podcasts that I talked about is that a lot of people will cap their pre-flop ranges. So if somebody is always three betting pre-flop with aces, kings, and ace king, and you actually get a board like this, let's say maybe it wasn't ace king nine, but ace king five, you can put a ton of pressure on them, even in a single raise pot, because a lot of guys won't just go to the end with like ace eight offsuit. You know what I'm saying? You know they don't have ace king, aces, or kings, and most of the time someone's going to raise off with bottom set by the turn. So if you're ever in a situation like that and somebody's gone call, they are actually very capped, even though people will commonly misuse that term. But this is interesting because you're blocking all the top pair. So button bet's 100. Does UTG fold?
UTG did not fold. Surprisingly, he called.
Wow. Okay. Well, then what do we think? What do we think here? What do we think the hands are?
So at that point, I put under the gun on a flush draw.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I expected. To be able to call that type of bet, there would need to be a flush draw.
So you think under the gun has a flush draw, and you think the button has...
I thought the button may have a flush draw if they're trying to semi bluff as well, but it just didn't make sense for there to be a call in between unless the hero had some. Sorry, heroes. I apologize. Unless the button under the gun had something as well, right?
Right. So it's also important to look back at the suits of your aces. If we're correct here, and I have it in the notes, you have ace of spades, ace of hearts, and the board is ace of clubs, king of diamonds, nine of diamonds. So someone could have ace x of diamonds and just think it's the absolute fucking nuts here, right? So the button could be making a bet with ace 10 of diamonds, ace 8 of diamonds. It's probably unlikely that they both have flush draws. Now, we talked about very unlikely that either player is ever going to have ace king here. right? Aces or kings, obviously. And so then, you're sort of left with, if the button has some sort of made hand range, it's going to be ace X of diamonds, the occasional like king nine, right? I'm sure you see those calls, which is bottom two. Maybe 9-9. It would tend to think that it wouldn't bet this large, but this is just a great spot for you. I mean, I'm check raising. I mean, if the under the gun's got 630 and the button has 850, if you're ever thinking about just calling here again, I would be hesitant to do that because I think on a brick it might get checked through, and that's an absolute disaster for you.
Right. And this is where I made my first mistake.
Yeah.
I make many mistakes in poker, but this is the first one of the hand, right? My original plan was to check raise no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
But then when the bet came out 100 and a call of 100, I decided to flat call.
And then your plan is that you think the button's definitely going to bet the turn.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, again, obviously you're calling this in. Fast playing for the most part is the best way to go about playing in these games. There's some combo draws out there too. Sometimes you can get into some very awkward sort of stack size situations, but when it goes pot call, I'm absolutely drooling. The interesting part about this is that for thick value, I'd actually rather have king here or 9-9 versus your hand, just because then there's just so much more skewed towards people having hands that are good, that are going to call down. And I feel like here you might get yourself into a little bit of a pickle. We're going to call the pot 400, even though I know it's a couple dollars short. And, under the gun, the button's going to have like 725 left, and under the gun's going to have like around 500 left, right?
Correct. And is there any credence though to calling this bet and then betting large on the turn to a safe card?
Well, you mean sort of like a stop and go type of play?
Kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I almost like that better than depending on than making the button sort of. I almost like that play better than trying to hope for the button here to bet, because you could have even had an audible in the middle of the hand here where you're like, all right, well, I was gonna just call, but now that the under the gun has called the pot size bet, if you take a look at it from the button's perspective, even if the button has like ace eight of diamonds or a combo draw like queen 10 of diamonds, again, I'm going to put myself in the button spot. Sometimes we out level ourselves a little bit, but what if I were to bet pot and then under the gun calls and then the pre-flop raiser overcalls and the turn's a brick, I'm going to be checking through my draws almost 100% of the time on the turn. And I'm going to be checking through ace eight of diamonds too, because I think I'm beat. I mean, that would be the logical thing. So I just think it's going to get checked through a lot on the turn because the under the gun seems very, very strong. I mean, obviously the button could have like king nine or ace nine and you're going to get a bet out. But in general, that whole check call lead, it's not really fundamentally sound in the sense that you don't really have any bluffs. You could make it look like you're waiting for a safe card with like ace, queen, ace, jack. I just don't know if it's going to necessarily induce a raise or anything like that. What's the turn?
Okay, the turn is the three of diamonds.
All right, well, that's not a brick.
That's definitely not a brick. And
so that completes the flush. Yep.
Yep. And what kept flowing through my mind is your colleague, David Tuckman, saying, well, you can't be scared of the monsters under your bed, but I needed a nightlight because
I'd be scared here on the turn. This isn't monsters under the bed. This is you're blocking a shit ton of the aces up. We know that ace king is impossible because of pre-flop, and you have a full pot size bet and a call. There's a very good chance here someone has a flush.
Yep, and that was my thoughts exactly. So under the gun checks, I check because of the scare card, and then the button checks.
Okay, so the button checks. So that would assume you kind of want to think that the button doesn't have a flush here. And for two reasons. Number one, if the button has a small flush, that's almost never slow played because of sort of the scare, the bad beat that might come if they let off another free card. Occasionally you might see the button have like the nut flush here, and he thinks he's just cagey because it's low stakes and he's sort of slow playing. So, once in a while you would see that, but I mean, at least you get to see a free card.
Yes. And
okay.
I'm hopeful that a full house comes, but
Hmm.
unfortunately, when the river comes, it's the Jack of Spades.
Okay, so the Jack of Spades comes in, which completes Queen 10, which really shouldn't be relevant at all because of the flop action, unless somehow the button was just like making like a monkey bet with Queen 10 and somehow got there for a full pot size bet. But again, I tend to think that that's a little bit unlikely. Now, does the under the gun bet now?
Now the under the gun checks, and
Wow.
then
Okay.
I I at this point think as you do, well, the button didn't check before and under the gun didn't check, so
Hmm.
I let out with a bet of $180.
So you bet 180 into like 400.
Correct.
This is a weird situation here when you get the button checks behind on the diamond and now UTG checks here from up front. Again, the jack shouldn't really be relevant at all in somebody either has a flush or not. I think that this is a fine value bet here, and I'm kind of leaning towards thinking that maybe the button, if they don't have the nut flush, had some sort of flop value that was not ace X, that king nine, set of nines that obviously check back on the turn because of the front door, and the UTG has like you know an ace or some bullshit like that. So I think that this is fine to get called by that sort of value portion of the button's hands. It's not a flush. So okay, so you bet 180.
I bet 180, and then the button responds by jamming all in.
Oh God.
And then I
So UTG folds, right?
UTG folded pretty quickly.
So
And
what's the
then
what? So 180. So you bet 180, and then jams for how much total?
it's a total of approximately $720.
So 180 plus 400 is 580, and then so it's 1300, and it's 540 to call.
That's right.
1300, 540 to call. Well, one of the small states. I'm doing a podcast series on the subscription podcast on Crush Live Poker. I don't know if you're a CLP sub or not. I don't remember exactly. The definitive guide to small stakes exploits. I believe that one of the exploits that I'm covering for tomorrow is overfolding later street aggression in sort of live games. I'm trying to look at it here. Let's see here. Overfolding later streets to raises. Now, this is really interesting here because I mean, it has to be a bluff here for you to beat, right? Now, it's weird though
Mhm.
because it goes check behind and then jam, right? On a card that really shouldn't mean anything here. And you're like, well, but he's going to be betting like all the flushes here on the turn. Like I said, I've seen these nut flush hands played out like this before. And then also some sort of like I said, possibly like a monkey bet here on the flop with like a queen 10 that might get there. But I sort of I really, really lean towards ace X of diamonds. If you want my opinion, I don't think that you're going to be good here. One out of, say, 3.5 times. You're going to be getting about 2.5 to 1 here, right? So you need to be good here one
Mhm.
out of 3.5 times. Now, if you want to look at this from an MDF perspective, minimum defense frequency, the button is actually risking 720, I think you said total, right, to win 580. So it's over a pot size sort of risk, which would mean that you'd probably need to. So he's got to. It's a he on the button, right? He's got to be right, like maybe 55 to 60% of the time. This bluff has to get through, which means that you only have to defend with 40% of your hands. But obviously, as played, ace ace is going to be in that. I think in the hands that you get here with. So, if you want to sort of call down and say linearly, where if there's ever an overplay of like 9-9 or something like that, you would think ace ace is the one to do it. But would I fold here in this spot? Like, I've taken these traveling trips to Jacksonville, and sometimes I just kind of sigh call and just be like, it's Florida.
Yeah.
I've seen some weird shit, but I would say most of the time you're not good here. What do people in the chat say here? I mean, it is really, really Phoenix Crispy says Rampage calls it off with Ace Queen. What do you think? What do you think, guys in the chat? Call or fold? It really does look like the nut flush to me. I wouldn't expect a smaller flush here. It's a really tough one. So what did you think about here, and what did you end up doing?
So I sat there and I tanked Bart. I was so confused. Just for full disclosure, I am a CLP subscriber.
Okay.
That doesn't necessarily mean I'm great at poker yet. I'm
Mhm.
trying to learn. I'm trying to learn as much as possible.
Right.
But I was just sitting there going, man, this is a horrible, no good, very bad day, kind of like that children's book. And I realized I'm thinking about children's books rather than I'm thinking about math. So I had to stop, and I audibly said WWBD, and that's just what would Bart do. And then I started thinking of Queen's Gambit, and I started picturing you with your white pen circa 2020 writing on a board of all the different combinations that could be possible here. And I kept coming back to the ace of diamonds, queen of
Let me
diamonds, ace diamonds, 10 diamonds,
right.
ace diamond,
Let me
two
just
through five,
let me interject
you
here
know.
because
Yeah.
most people on the live chat say fold, but there is somebody that brings up a good point here, Scott Albert, who says that you would rather you don't want the ace of diamonds to call with. Yes, I would think that you would rather have the ace of diamonds here to call with what the person's representing, right? Because
Right.
if you say this is the nut flush or nothing, and you have the ace of diamonds, and the guy doesn't have the nut flush, right? you know, so you don't have the best combo of aces, in my
If
opinion, to
I
go.
have the ace of diamonds
Yeah,
here, I call pretty quickly. But
yeah.
because I did not have the ace of diamonds, I had to go through the math, and I kept coming back to, am I good one out of 3.5 times or so, 30% of the times? And then considering one, and Bart, I know this is wrong for me to say, but the button was uh, a female, and then
Oh, the button was a female. Okay.
for her to push into someone who's also behind her left
Yeah.
to act, and not just me. If it was heads up, it would be one thing, but there's three people, so I
Yeah, I
ended up
mean,
tank folding.
obviously, okay, so hero folds. I mean, obviously, there's an extra risk too if the under the gun could be sandbagging something. I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and you can call me, non-political. Everyone thinks I'm a liberal, even though I'm the furthest thing from a liberal because I wasn't a huge fan of Trump or the current GOP. If you saw my tweet, but not being politically correct because we try to use as much information as possible at the table. I would tend to think that women will bluff less, and they usually have it more, and I'll give them credit. So you fold, okay, and then UTG
I
folds.
so UTG did fold, and then I end up folding. And I looked at the button and I asked her, I said, look, if I show a really strong hand, will you show? And she said she typically doesn't show, but she did show in this case
Okay, what'd she
what
have?
she had. So I showed my set of aces, and then she showed king of hearts, 10 of diamonds. She turned her 10 of diamonds into a bluff.
Wow. Wow, that's something that, again, I mean, that will go against what normal thought in terms of my experience of what I'm seeing here is that is not normal. Now, you can find outliers in terms of the results.
Yeah.
I just don't think you're good here. I think it's probably maybe closer than some of the chatters think, but I might have to walk away from that one for a little bit, for a few minutes, gain my composure before I come back to the table. Because I'm
Well,
like, what the fuck,
right, no, right after that hand, I tilt bluffed into her another $100, but I ended up getting some of it back later on in the session. But it did put me on tilt a little bit.
Yeah. All right. I got to move along, Tom. Thank you very much for the call.